שמע שיר חדש ובנענע.
I'm like to dedicate this year, especially to those unfortunate karbanos that happened this past week with Sahel and over distress of the confrontation within our own people, where a young boy was shot in outside of Binyamin area, and we're davening for the peace and shleimut of Am Yisrael, which we need so desperately at this time. So I want to pick up last week. Apparently, this year was very highly watched, and I wanted to just recap very quickly and then move on to what I believe is the next thing. So we asked last week, like, what's going to be after the 12-day war? Like, what's next? And the bottom line is that if you look at both the Megillah, Esther, there was a process by which first Haman was eliminated. Then several months later, the decrees of Haman were countermanded. And then close to a year later, there was literally regime change in many Medinot, because Mordechai became the de facto president of many countries as being the second in command to Achashverosh. Now, this notion of second in command to Achashverosh resonates very deeply as a result of this 12-day war. And that is, you saw something that was very, very unusual, maybe hasn't been as blatant since, at least in Jewish history, since those times, did happen in the Spanish Middle Ages, and that is where you had a very powerful Jewish leader who was a military leader who commanded armies and provided security and warred with nations, but under the guise of a higher authority. So I'll give you a particular example. You know, we speak about Mordechai. We said last week, he declared war, essentially, on all the Amim. There was Medinot. These were states. They weren't, as we may have thought, that they ran around attacking individual Sonei Yisrael. You know, they didn't just go into, to this particular city and that particular city and seek out individuals. These were organized armies that came out to defeat the Jewish people, much like a Hezbollah, much like a Syria, much like an Iraq, much like Iran itself, Houthis, Gazans, you name it, who are organized militias who had to be fought by Mordechai's decree. And the Megillah says beferish that Mordechai was a fearsome figure among the non-Jews. Now let's face it, Jews usually don't cut a fearsome figure, like they say, was it Jackie Mason used to say a joke, Lahavdil used to say, nobody ever walked down the street and said, "Oh, there's 3 Jewish accountants there." Nobody's afraid of, not in Chutz La'aretz anyway. But now things have changed, because especially with the self-earned power, royal power, which I said was the royal power of the House of Shaul, which was really the first monarchy within Klal Yisrael that organized as a nation to fight wars, as in a complete nation, not individual Shvatim or Tkufos. There were many combinations of which during Shoftim, but never in the form of Melech, as we know. And there was an example of that with Shmuel HaNagid. Shmuel HaNagid was a very, very unique figure, and he was the vizier of Granada, the city-state of Granada, which was under a Muslim king. And that Muslim king allowed him to be essentially his chief general, and he fought many wars, and he steered clear of various politics. It's a well-known episode in Jewish history, medieval Jewish history. Take a look. Shmuel HaNagid. And he not only was a great warrior and politician in that he won battles both in the field and both in the palaces of rulership, but he also was the Gadol Hador at the same time. He was a sample of what David HaMelech might have been like. We actually saw a sample. He was a prolific writer. He wrote Jewish poetry about his wars, much like his own book of Tehillim. And then he also wrote a Sikum, which was I would call it a precursor to what would later be the Rambam, actually, and the Torah later, much later, but not that much later, is the Rambam, where he takes the entire Torah and codifies it and calls it Hilchasa Gavrasa. He wrote a Sikum of halacha. Okay, he didn't do it the way Rambam did it, where Rambam, much like in Rabbi Kiva-like fashion, unpacked everything and reorganized it in a logical sequence. But Shmuel HaNagid went Masechta by Masechta. He followed the traditional order. He didn't reorganize it in a methodological way, which was a breakthrough and a guide to make it easy. The Rambam essentially created an index to the entire Torah and organized it logically in his Yad HaChazaka. Shmuel HaNagid was similar. So there are experiences. We have history where when we're not quite in our own Malchus, but there are echoes, I'll call it echoes of Malchus. Mordechai under Achashverosh. We mentioned Shmuel HaNagid under his Vizier, and other occasions like that. And now we have Netanyahu and Trump, which is a very, very interesting analogy. If you want to look at the events of the 12 days and its aftermath, 12-day war and its aftermath, I don't really like to call it the 12-day war, because I think we're still in the Simchas Torah war. And to me, I'd like to look at it from a wider angle and to say, and spend a moment with you just reflecting on what really has been. If you notice, however, the 12-day war I thought is interesting because it's double 6. 6 is Sheishis Yimei Chol, and then comes Shabbos. But the reality is that, yeah, even this episode is linked to the Shabbos war. 6 Sheishis Yom Mitzvah Maltecha V'Yom Hashvi Shabbos Hashem Elokecha. It started on an ultimate Shabbos. Okay, now we have their Sheishis Yimei Chol as it continues to unravel. But essentially, it was a war against Kedushas Yisroel in the sense of Simchas Torah, denying the validity of Torah, denying the joy of being a Jew who has received the Torah, and also violating the sanctity of the Jewish people in body and soul. The only time we ever saw that in history before the Nazi era, of course, many pogroms throughout the ages and isolated incidents, but biblically, only Amalek mutilated Jewish bodies. That's on record by Chazal, that they actually cut the milos, the circumcisions, off their captured, their captives. Those literally, it was a Simchas Torah Shabbos war incident, an October 7th war incident, in which people were mutilated in such a way in their reproductive areas in ways which was unheard of in cruelty and unparalleled in evil. So it's a classic battle against Kedushat HaTorah, Kedushas Yisrael, but interesting how it's playing out now in this seemingly awkward partnership between, and at times highly strained and highly unpredictable, as was Achashverosh with Mordechai. Because Achashverosh had a relationship with Mordechai the whole time. He sat Bishar HaMelech. Mordechai was always a minister, always was the servant of the king Achashverosh, but that didn't mean that he and the Jewish people were favored or had any sort of malchus. He had individual dignity, much like Ganiel had, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, all those who were forced to serve the king of Bavel. But so I think what I'd like to take a look is the bigger picture of what has happened since October 7th through this episode, okay, from the lens of some of our Makoros. And let's understand a little bit the bigger picture of what's really going on, because it's a lot more than the bombing of a nuclear site, which doesn't really indicate all that much, because even if they did set the program back, right, and there's debating, and now there's all kinds of leaks and stories and counter estimates, That's not the point. That's a makkah, as we said last week. Though we haven't gotten to what? Kriyas Yamsuf. Kriyas Yamsuf is the regime change. So a lot happened to Paro. Much like a lot happened to Khomeini. He lost all of his B'nai B'chorim. He lost all of his, his proteges. But there was no regime change. Paro remained alive after Makas Bechoros, even though he was a Bechor. But it was by design. Because Akash Baruch Hu said, Vani ichbadeti et leif Paro, I'm going to make Paro's heart hard, that he's going to get an even deeper defeat, meaning complete regime change. This was not the end. Much like the Makos did not terminate the rule of Paro at all. In fact, he was able to regroup within 7 days. And at that point, 7 days later, I mean, even 3 days he regrouped. After 3 days, he started to regroup. And after 7 days, he already had Klal Yisrael back in his clutches. You can expect much of the same. You can expect, and we've seen it already, that in Iran, they strike a defiant pose. They claim victory. They regroup. And Ma'azos asinu asher shalachnu Yisrael ma'avdeinu. What have we done? Right? That we accepted this ceasefire or whatever it was? No. We're going to go on the offense. We can definitely expect that. But we have to hope, as in biblical times, in times of the Torah, because as Chazal tell us, that the Geula Ha'asid Lavo follows all the patterns. The Torah establishes archetypes and patterns that spin around in history, but are the same. In other words, they'll different eras of time, different epochs, different names and faces, but the essential struggles remain the same. The essential issues remain the same. And the triumph that we're looking for is essentially the same. Triumph is the Malchus Shem Shemayim, right? Kablu Kulam es-o Malchus Shemayim, right? We are the first to demonstrate it, and others eventually, and the whole world will follow. And that's what we say every day in Aleinu. I mean, that the all of B'nai Basar Yikaru Lifnecha, that's the end game. That's when we sing Shira, and that's when Paro comes to the realization that Hashem Hu Elokim. By the way, that bears out in an incredible medrash that says that the king of Nineveh, who we read about on Yom Kippur in the story of Yonah, was none other than Paro. And Paro survived and became king, not in Egypt, in the western portion, to the west of Eretz Yisrael, but to the east of Eretz Yisrael, in the city of Nineveh. Oh, well, Tarshish is also in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean. Yeah. So he becomes Melech, and the minute the Navi shows up, akin to Moshe showing up, he does immediate tshuva. So Paro has been chastised, has learned his lesson, he's completed his tshuva. We read that on Yom Kippur because it's a model that we all need to follow. Paro, it's very interesting. Paro becomes our dogma of tshuva. He becomes our paradigm. You learn from Paro. Paro got it. He got the Makos. He lost Kriyas Yamsuf. And after that was Makabel Omachus Shemayim. The minute, and he went to such an extreme, Paro. Did you know what he did in Sefer Yonah? It says that they put sackcloth and ashes on the animals. Can you imagine the horses are running around instead of with saddles and all these things? They're running around with big day avelos. They're coming with the slichas. They're neighing to the slichos. What do you want from the animals? Hashem says, I remember very much. Paro says, I remember very much what happened to my animals, what happened to my horses, and what happened to my cows, and what happens to my sheep. And I don't want that to happen again. I want to show Hashem I learned my lesson from all the makos of Barad, Arpech, and Sus Paro. I get it. So this means that everything that happens has to conform to easily recognizable and ingrained patterns that Hashem has taught us through His Holy Torah throughout the centuries, not only from the Psukim and Tanakh, but also through the various Gemaras, Mishnayos, etc. So let's take a look. If it's true that we're positing that that the Achashverosh Mordechai tandem is similar to what's happening today, because indeed Achashverosh was the emperor of the world, and it's true that he had a very strong vizier or assistant, and the world is recognizing that. And what happened is that Mordechai became a feared figure because he was a military figure. He literally took up the cudgels of King Shaul, who also was a military figure. So that means that the battle is somehow joined. It's very interesting to note that the ultimate partnership between the world of Edom, which of course is Christianity and anything related to Christianity today, and the world of Klal Yisrael was the paradigmal relationship was Rebbe and Antoninus, and it's spoken about not by accident again here in the Gemara of Avodah Zarah that we've been reading in Daf Yomi. We speak about the imperial Rome and so on, and the point is, when he passed away, when Antoninus passed away, Rebbe declared a very sad thing. He said, how unhappy it is that the bundle, this is Gemara Brachos, how the bundle has become unraveled. It was a bundle. It was a team. There was a camaraderie. Rebbe and Antoninus were exchange twins. Some say that Antoninus was substituted for Rebbe, right? Because he wasn't circumcised. So when they came looking for the Jewish baby Rebbe, Romans came, and they came looking for him to kill him and kill his mother, they presented instead Antoninus, who we identify today, essentially speaking, pretty much 100%, is Marcus Aurelius, who was a successor to Antoninus the Pious, and it came after the era of Hadrian, and he actually was a wonderfully independent thinker. He wasn't a Baal Avodah Zarah at all. He was a philosopher, king, and he had many interesting conversations with Rebbe, which don't have to go into detail here, but one of them that we learned about was that he would ask advice from Rebbe on political affairs and personal affairs. He asked him how to handle his political rivals, and he also asked him how to handle his daughter, who was promiscuous. On every level, he bowed down and let Rebbe walk on his back to get to his bed. Now, Halavai Trump should get there, if he ever will. Remember, that can only be, listen carefully, if that Jew is Rebbe-like, meaning it's not necessarily a figure like Netanyahu, but one of the great tzaddikim, which there is a relationship. One thing I noticed this week was Gimel Tammuz. As you know, that's the yard site of the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Gimel Tammuz. We just had it. It was just Sunday. Sunday's Gimel Tammuz. Today's Monday. Yesterday. So, if you recall, President Trump went on Gimel Tammuz of last year's, 1 year ago. Okay, last June, to visit the graveside of the Lubavitcher Rebbe on his yard site. He was brought there by members of Chabad, and also the commentator Ben Shapiro, if you recall, came and he was like being Matargim a little bit. But we had the videos of him standing by the side of the kever saying Tillim with the Amakan and davening and putting a kvittel. This is unheard of. And the person who just recently visited him, Bolsonaro from Argentina, he basically wants to be a convert to Yiddishkeit through Chabad. And he gave, apparently, when he visited Yerushalayim and they went to the Kotel, this was just like a week or two ago, a framed picture of his visit with the Rebbe. And then Trump put out a letter, as presidents generally do. But this letter was very interesting and telling. Congratulations. And Netanyahu also put out a letter, remembering the Rebbe from his personal encounters. This is something Trump and Netanyahu have unusually in common. You understand this? A kesher to a great and world-renowned, not only Talmid Chacham, but Makarev, legendary leader. They say in the name of Rabbi Soloveitchik, that he said about his generation, which was primarily 60s and 70s, dominant, and then, ended in the late 70s, early 80s, there were three prominent figures, one being himself, Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik, Rosh Yeshiva at YU, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and Zetzal, and Moshe Feinstein, and he would say and they were all, of course, close with each other and respected each other greatly in every way. So they say in the name of the Rav or Soloveitchik, he said there were three leaders in this generation. I'm the Rosh Yeshiva of the generation. I am carrying the tradition of Talmudic thinking, going back to Chaim Brisker. I carry the name of the Brisker dynasty, Soloveitchik, and I'm the great Rosh Yeshiva of the generation. Can learn, teach Talmud. Anybody who's going to teach Talmud on the highest level that you can teach, many will emulate and even look into the many volumes of his Shiurim. I don't think there's anybody who is truthful to themselves, unless they're some sort of superlative personalities of the generation. But a regular Rosh Yeshiva and a regular Rosh Kollel will not go into Shir without having looked at Rav Soloveitchik's notes, because he's going to say, I'm missing a very basic piece of Torah or a Chakira or something to understand. He's on the Rosh Yeshiva of the generation. Then came Rav Moshe Feinstein, who says he's the posek of the generation. It's much like Kohen, like Moshe and Aaron. Moshe, the teacher of Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu. Then you have Aaron HaKohen, who's also the posek. But then you have the Manig, the Melech, right? The Melech is from Yehuda, is from that's like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and that person, he said, was actually somebody who does emanate from the Davidic line, the Rabbi Schneerson Zatzal. He says he's the leader or the Nasi. Okay, so that is the three figures that keep them in your mind, because they hover over these conversations between our current day leader in Israel and in America, because there's a connection. There's a connection. And that really is what's moving in behind the scenes. So let me explain. The notion of perfecting the world cannot be accomplished in a military way. Because we say, what do we say? Kol Kol Yaakov, V'yadai Midei Esav. By Yishmael, we say Kol Hana'ar. He also has a very big connection to prayer. And ultimately, it is not going to be decided by military might. That's not our conceptualization of what we would call the final regime change. Yes, Amalek must precede it, and yes, that is military. But at the same time, the rest of the world has to be brought into the equation with love and understanding and wisdom. And that's more the model of Shlomo HaMelech that really represents the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash in reality. And that means, and I heard this in the name of Nachman of Breslov, he said, Mashiach will conquer the world without firing a single shot. His will be a non-military victory. People will listen to him, come to learn wisdom, be uplifted in their humanity and reason, and they'll want to put down their tools of war. Okay, so we are not there, and people who think we're there, we are not there. It's an evolution which is going on. But here's what is going on, which is a wonderful pathway and segue to that next era, which is hopefully coming soon in our day, any day, and that is the world conforming to the instructions of Hashem for mankind in the form of the Torah, but more specifically, the 7 Noahide mitzvahs. Shev mitzvah. Now, there were 3 major challenges to the authority of Hashem. Okay, one of them was the Mabul, the generation of the flood. Okay, 2 was the generation of the Tower of Babel, known as Dor HaFlaga. And the 3rd one occurred within the Jewish people, and that was in the aftermath of the Meraglim. Okay, Korach emerges, and that argument on the validity of Moshe, which we read about just a couple of days ago in the Parsha, according to the Megala Amukos, we mentioned this very briefly last week, was a reincarnation of those 3 episodes. In other words, Korach had predecessors. It was the same machloket, but it advanced through 3 stages. until it was largely reconciled. Now I'm going to prove my point to you of what the Megala Mukos is saying through a simple Mishnah in Sanhedrin. In Parak Chelek, it starts off, Kol Yisrael Yesham Chelek Lamaba. Every Jew has a place in the world to come. Now, this does not mean to exclude non-Jews. It just means every Jew has a part, but a Vada, non-Jews can earn Olam Haba. It just means every Yisrael is guaranteed a place in Olam Haba. Whereas for the nations of the world, it depends on their actions, on their choices, on their Bechira. Okay? But a Jew has an inherent portion of the world to come. Of course, he can lose it, but it's not, in other words, as they say, it's yours to lose, as opposed it's yours to win. That's the difference. Every Jew's given a portion of Olam Haba. If they don't blow it, they'll get it. If they don't ruin it. But a non-Jew is not guaranteed, but can certainly earn it by the virtue of their choices. And the proof of that is that the Mishnah then goes asks, Ve'elu she'ein lahem olam haba. Okay, and it goes through these exact examples. And they're not random. They're really not random. It goes like this. It says, Dor hamabel ein lahem chelek haba. Shenemar lo yadon ruchi ba'adam l'olam. I can't tolerate this type of behavior forever. So it brings the mabel. And then it says, Dor haflaga ein lahem chelek haba. The generation of Nimrod, where the protagonist was Nimrod and Avram, as opposed to Noah versus the world. Okay? And then the next thing that they bring is Dor HaMidbar. Those are built against Moshe, and specifically lists out two examples, the Meraglim as well as Korach. It's right there in the Mishnah. So if you want to read the Mishnah as random, okay, fine, I'm not arguing with you. But if you want to look at it from the context of the Megala Mukos, that this was not disjointed parts. This was a progression. This was a mathematical progression. So let's take a look at that for a moment. What does that mean? So Chazal tell us that the Dor HaMabo was ki hishchis kol basar lefanai, and their fate was sealed because of Hamas, ironically. Hamas represented the complete disregard of any boundaries, of any rules whatsoever. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine. And the Mabul, by definition, means the erasure of boundaries. Shamayim and Aretz were given strict boundaries by Hashem. The Aretz can't overtake the Yam, and the Yam can't overtake the Aretz. That's what Hashem created, that perfect balance. It says that. By Yavdel Hashem made that differentiation, as he made a differentiation between day and night. Hashem created Guvulim. And there is no Kedusha without Gvulim. It doesn't work that way. Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol, ben Or L'choshech, ben Yisrael Amim, ben Mashvil L'Shesh B'Yamaseh. Havdalah is the operative word if you are to maintain order and Kedusha in the world. However, if you refuse to obey Hashem's natural boundaries, even to the point of deviating not only in terms of immorality with Ashes Ish or with others, but even within the species of animal world, man with animal with man with man, woman with woman, whatever it might be, those boundaries are for a reason. We were given the bracha, pruvu, mulos aretz. That goes for humankind. That goes for the animal kingdom. You're not allowed to be misaris. You can't neuter an animal for no good reason. They do it. Veterinarians have a big problem. If you're a frum veterinarian, you got a big problem because you can only treat animals that belong to goyim, and even that's not, according to the Minchas Chinuch, there's questions whether a goy can even have an animal neutered, because there are also mitzvah in these ideas which were given to Noah. They're b'nei Noah, and Noah already was given that of Tsar Bali Chayim and so on. The mitzvah Puravu was given to nascent mankind. In fact, the halacha is if a non-Jew has children and does conversion along with his children, he gets credit for Jewish Puravu. What do you mean? His children are not even related to him according to halacha. There's a one unique way they are related to him, that he gets credit for the mitzvah of fulfilling Puravu even as a Noahide, because these are human mitzvahs. So they all upgraded to be Jews. Big deal. There's still a filiality, there's still a connection between a father and a son, at least on a mitzvah level, where he has already discharged his mitzvah of populating the world, which is a human thing. It's not only a Jewish thing. It was reiterated to Klal Yisrael, but it's the first mitzvah given to mankind. God Orisha. Orisha got the first 6 mitzvahs. So the challenge of the Dor HaMabul is that they refused to accept God's creation. They didn't want to acknowledge God's creation. They said, Hashem created the world. We don't care. We do not accept the master of the universe. Even if he's a creator, we'll grant you the fact that he's a creator, but he has no control, supervision, din, less dayan. He could care less what happens in the world. We can do whatever we want with impunity and mix up all the boundaries of holiness, and nothing will happen to us. And Hashem says that's not going down, because that's not the purpose of this world. The purpose of the world is to develop. You cannot develop anything without discipline. My saintly first father-in-law, Rabbi Wilfred Shushat, Rabbi Zev Shushat of Montreal, who was a tzaddik of a person, he once gave a shiur in my shul in Ov Shalom on the Upper West Side when I was a rabbi there, back in the day. And he used the analogy about a tennis game. He says a tennis game is not a tennis game unless you observe the lines. Like if you can land the ball anywhere you want on the court, there's no game. The game is that there are boxes, and you must keep the ball in the designated spaces when you return it. Otherwise, there's no points, there's no game, there's no anything. He said that's the analogy to mitzvahs. If everything is random, it doesn't really matter. So is what we said recently in the Daf Yomi, that Hashem forgave the nations of the world when Avram came along from even being responsible, because they weren't holding by playing the game. They could not maintain the boundaries. Only through Avram and their connection to Avram would they be able to learn to discipline themselves, develop their souls to the point where they can keep boundaries. Okay. So if that was the generation of the Mabul, and that was versus Noah, okay, who was carrying the Shev Mitzvahs. Now came the next generation, which was versus Adam, which is versus Avram, the first Jew. Nimrod versus Avram, the first Jew. What was their rebellion exactly? They said, we believe in God 1,000%. We believe that Hashem brought the Mabul to the world. So there is a judge, and there is punishment. We get that. And we're not going to violate the boundaries that Hashem created. However, we will not allow our power or our mortality to be up to Hashem. Hashem, you created the world? Great. You made certain rules? We'll respect them. But my life or my death and my hanhaga and what I want to do is not up to you. Human power in the unity of man, because that's what they were. They were completely unified. They say, if we can unify mankind as one, we can then overpower the will of God in the world. As if to say, Hashem can overpower individuals and maybe even individual nations. But if man as a whole, all of mankind, would stand together as one, we will have the ability to overturn God's will. That was their thesis. And it's played out in the Medrash, which says that they said to themselves, well, it's now like 1,656 years after the Mabul. So, in the year 1656 came the Mabul, so it's going to come now, an anniversary of that. We better get ready by building a giant tower to put support on the sky. What are you kidding? What does that mean even? You can put support, no Mabul for us. So obviously the metaphor is that they say power, human power, will just force. It said if you didn't want to build the tower, they threw you down. They didn't care how many people they killed. The main thing is the collective. Individuals mean nothing. Individuals mean absolutely nothing. But the collective is more like a communist concept. We are all one, and we can defeat the will of God together. That was their folly. And of course, Avram comes to say, no, you can't. No, you can't. And his adversary was Nimrod, the ultimate force of power, who teamed up with Chadar Laomar, who, according to Yaakov Weinberg, is none other than Hammurabi himself, who set lots of laws and boundaries. But human decisions on life and death. And Avram proved them wrong. With a handful of dust, he defeated the 4 armies, according to Chazal, to show that the power is the power of Hashem. Not mankind cannot overpower God. Now, and then came the third, which is Korah. So the Magal HaMukos said that, remember Avram went around looking for 50 individuals in each of the 5 cities of Stone? He said those 250 people he was looking for appeared in the Machlokas of Korach. Those were the 250 people that were killed by the fire pans. They reappeared again. Wait a minute. So that means this is a rebellion against God and against his Navi. The first Machlokas was against, man versus Noah. The second Machlokas was Nimrod versus Avram, the Dora Flux. This is now Korach against Moshe. Now, what is that? And the 250 men, and Dasan and Aviram, and what was all their issue? Korach said as follows: I believe in God. I believe that God created the world. I believe that God is the ultimate power in the world. I even believe in the Holy Torah that he gave the Jewish people. But between us Jews, there is no one greater than another. And more than that, even in Hashem's Torah. So among us, we have our say on Torah Shebaal Peh, which is correct in a certain way. Yes, Hashem gave us the Torah, and now it's ours to elaborate on. So Korach then started to logically attack various mitzvos and mock them, and mock the way Moshe was interpreting them, which was directly from Hashem. It's reminiscent of the episode of Moshe Rabbeinu going in to see Rabbi Akiva, not understanding Rabbi Akiva's incredible drushot, out of lifting halachos out of the tagin, out of the crowns of the letters of the Torah, because for Moshe Rabbeinu everything was pure clarity. Of course, this is pshat. Rabbi Akiva had to recreate it intellectually with human logic. Korach was absolutely not to be outdone in human logic. But the bottom line is, when Moshe went into the Shir of Rabbi Akiva, he was very upset. He says, I don't know what this is going on over here. This is not my way of doing things. Until he heard Rabbi Akiva say, this is the halacha. Sorry, it's not based on our logic. It's halacha Moshe Sinai. It's a Kabbalah from Moshe on Sinai. And Moshe's heart was gladdened. This was the debate between Korach and Moshe. Moshe said, through no fault of mine, Hashem has defined the Torah along certain lines. Just because I gave you the Torah doesn't mean that there's not a Masorah to go along with it, which we call the oral Torah, the Torah Shebaal Peh. Which is why in my thesis, when Korach was swallowed alive, right, it says 2 things. So Tiptacharas at Piha, the earth opened its mouth, and then the Piha Aretz, the mouth of the earth, swallowed him. If it opened up, a Tibaka Aretz, what do you need a mouth for? Just close it up, and then you get smushed in between, like we read about in this week's Parsha. The Amori were hanging out in the mountain clefts, and then Hashem squished the mountains together miraculously behind the scenes, and Hashem, we saw the blood of the Amori seeping out. Why wasn't that good enough? Why do we need a mouth for? So I'd like to suggest that, first of all, Korach's seductive words, it was his mouth that led people astray, his words, and also his argument was against the oral Torah, which was Koveya the halacha, and that's why he was swallowed by a mouth, because his argument was against the oral Torah. So let's look at a little recap of this. You ready? If the Mabul was against Hashem having any rules, right? Even if they're just Sheva Mitzvos, they don't want to accept any rules of God. Complete Mabul. Second was a little more subtle. We accept the rules of God, but we feel as a unified force we can overwhelm that. That was the next generation. The third iteration of this machloket was Korach saying, we believe in God, we believe in his Torah, but each and every Jew has a right to determine Torah according to their own terms. We all heard God from Sinai, so Moshe Rabbeinu, you're really no better than us. And that denies the Masorah of the oral law, which is the yesod of halachic Judaism and what makes us different from anybody else in the world. The 3-stage machlokas. Now, very interesting on this note, and I'm going to get back to what's happening overarchingly, because these 3 stages really represent the three stages that we all have to go through, the world has to go through to get back to the place where it needs to get to. Ultimately, the repair of the world is through the Moshe Rabbeinu, through acceptance of Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu is the posek, Gadol Ador, the Rabbi Soloveitchik of the generation, the Moshe of the generation, especially the Rabbi Rebbe of the generation, who goes out of his way to regroup and connect the souls, right? Wherever they might be, so that is the stage that we're on, which means God's goodness, as outlined by the basic instructions for living that he gave the world in order to sustain itself, they shouldn't go to Tova Bohu, have to be reclaimed. Now let's just take a quick look. What has happened since the Shabbos Simchas Torah War of October 7th began? As I said last week, there is too many situations to enumerate. But the battle of good and evil, the battle of these three machlokasim is being waged in ways that we haven't seen. And I'll give you just several examples from this past week or so. Okay. So first of all, the battle for basic truths of morality. So in the Supreme Court, boundaries have been reinstated. Let me show you the boundaries that they put in. Number one, they've affirmed the fact that people who are illegal immigrants who violate boundaries, right? They don't follow the Mavdam and Kodesh L'chol. They don't follow procedure of entry that they're supposed to. And on top of that, they commit criminal offenses, which violate the rights of others, cannot be kept in the country by a judge's vote, one solitary judge's vote. When you've been speaking about Sodom, much of the Midrashim go on about the corrupt judges of Sodom. This is all in Perek Chelek as well. How they used to pervert justice. And they said, okay, for example, somebody killed somebody's son. He said, well, he took your son. He's going to have relations with your wife and produce another son to make up for it. That's the perversion of justice. It's just such a perversion of logic. Okay, so hold a boundary. Boundaries are important. Another boundary: should we fund all cases on a federal level of abortion? Now, abortion is not usher according to halacha under certain circumstances, especially not in the first 40 days. But indiscriminate abortion, even at late term, is certainly a violation of halacha. And the government of America decided that the government doesn't have to sponsor it. It's not a federal right. That's huge. That's reversing a terrible crime, a terrible violation of Shemitz Meninoch that America was committing, which was murder. Because you cannot pay money to abort a child, very, very late term or partial, what they call partial birth abortions. These are an Issa Rechitza. They may not be an Issa Doraisa necessarily because the baby is internal, but if it's for no good reason, it's certainly an Isur. It's certainly Usur. You may not be Chayav a death penalty for it because until a baby crowns, it's not considered a separate human being. But the truth is, some of these abortions were partial birth abortions, which meant the baby may have crowned, and at that point, it's objective murder. So that was a tikkun. Another tikkun is the issue of transgenderism, which and homosexuality. What happened this week was that the Secretary of Defense said there was a well-known, I think may have been Jewish, figure from the Congress who they named one of the battleships after. Okay, I don't want to say his name. But he was the first openly gay member of Congress. He was a very popular figure and so on. They named a U.S. battleship after him. I don't know what the connection is, but they just renamed it. They said, sorry, the United States is not going to emblazon the name of an open homosexual as its proud military banner. One thing that Trump did right away was stop the issue, kick the transgestorism out of the army. That's amazing because it's a restoration of the boundary of Zachar Nekeva, Bara Osam, which was established by the Bible. That's what the problem was. Why did Noah have to take in separate genders? You have to just look at this. It's all there. Noah had to fight transgenderism. Noah had to fight homosexuality. That was what he's there for. Because that's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants puravu. He wants different type of relationships that mirror the God-man relationship that can be productive, that can be fruitful, etc. Mind-boggling. Other things that have been going on in the Supreme Court have been handing victory after victory to these ideas of restoring sexual morality, restoring justice to the justice system, not allowing rogue judges to pervert justice. And another thing, which is really, really big, is the whole idea of defunding police, because one of the Shev Mitzvah Noach and the boundaries is law and order. You have to have law and order. If you don't have law and order, that's already indicated generation of the Mabul. Now, this candidate who was elected in the primary of the Democratic Party for mayor of New York, the city in which there are the most concentration of Jews anywhere in the world outside the land of Israel, right? It's supposed to be a place where there's some hashpah, a place where many tzaddikim are buried, a place where so much Torah is learned, and so on. And they wanted to put a mayor of this city who, A, is a Sonei Israel, wants to destroy the state of Israel, and more than that, he promotes terrorism and destruction of Am Yisrael. And you want to make him mayor of the town, which has the biggest Jewish community in the world? Is that not an alarm? If it's not a red alarm, I don't know what. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. He's young, he's good looking, he's charismatic, and people who want to throw off restrictions, which is what the basic idea is. I don't want any restrictions. I want to be whatever gender I want. You have to call me whatever I say, right? My kids can become male or female, whatever it might be. They don't have to reproduce because it's not important. We can cut off their ability to reproduce. Fine. These are all flagrant violations. Defund the police so there can be hefker and theft and stealing and Hamas. These are all trends that are demonstrating an affinity to the lifestyle of the Dor HaMabul or the Dor HaFlaga or the generation of Korach, in one instance or the other, specifically in refusing to accept the authority of Hashem. Now, someone wrote a very good, nice piece as an outcome of this 12-day war. I think this is quoted in one of the English newspapers. And they said, the thing that people are very upset about, and I saw this from several big anti-Semites who are speaking their garbage on the public forum, they say they can't understand how Israel could have been so successful. How is it possible that this tiny little country, from people who just came from the ashes of the Holocaust, were thrown out of the Muslim countries and sitting in Israel and being victims of wars against 7 nations. I mean, if there were ever a people that should be weak, broken, and defeated, it should be us. Through Hashem's will, all of a sudden, Israel rears its head as the Mordechai Tachashverosh, as the Shmuel Hanagid to the Vizier of Granada. And it's not something they can accept because they'll have to draw conclusions. What conclusion will they have to draw? Either that their religions are teaching them untruths about Judaism's place in the world, i.e. that our job is to teach Shev Mitzvah to the world, and that Yerushalayim is the center of that centerpiece, and the Beit HaMikdash is the centerpiece of those teachings. Or you'll have to say Jews are cheaters. They've always said Jews cheat. From Yaakov Avinu, he cheated, he stole the brachos from Esav. That's what the church said for years, that, the younger cheated the elder, but they're really, they put up reliefs on Notre Dame of Esav dominating his blind figure of Yaakov. Romans did it when they minted their coins, Judea-Capta. They said, a man standing over a forlorn woman. This is their image. We're supposed to be these forlorn, broken, blind people, reclining on the ground, and it's just not the case. And either they're going to come to terms with the fact that the Jewish people are special and connected to Hashem, or that Hashem has been misrepresented to them all along, and really both. So the 3-step machlokas exists between the Gentiles and the tzaddikim, the Noachs and the Avrahams and the Moshes, but also in outside the Jewish camp and in the Jewish camp and within the Jewish camp itself. So this is the point that brings us to the aftermath of the 12-day war, so the world's in shock. The world is in shock right now about the fact that the Jewish people are powerful, and it makes them very, very uncomfortable because they may have to alter their base beliefs that they've been taught through their religion, or they may need to give up behaviors to conform to a higher set of rules, which is even worse. Put down the banners, take off the, the Free Palestine t-shirts, and start supporting the Jewish people to do their best gift to mankind, which is to restore the Beis HaMikdash to the Evan Shasiya. So I just want to mention two things. Oh my gosh, we have to close. Okay, you ready? What's really next after all this? Yeah, Persia will rebound or will try to rebound, and Hashem has already nafal tipol them, so they likely are going to keep falling. They're bechinas haman nofel, my mashgiach said, or Moshe Wolfson. Once they start falling, because it says, as Zeresh said in the Megillah, Atah Hilos, we mentioned last week, Lin Pol lefanav im Zer Yehudim. If he's the Jew that's shaykh to the era of Mashiach, like a Shaul HaMelech who was charged l'malek, like a Mordechai, like an Esther, and of course later the Mashiach of Beis David, then okay, they fall. Now they probably continue to fall. What's even more interesting is the internal battle with Korach. Now, let me explain. When Moshe Rabbeinu, the reason why we believe in Moshe Rabbeinu, according to the Rambam in the 8th parak of Yisodei Torah, is not because he did crazy miracles. It's not because of missiles and bombs and blisteros that were absorbed by the clouds of glory, and it's not because of the makos that came hailing down on the Egyptians with wild animals. That's not why we believe in Moshe. Because anybody could come and present those type of miracles, and then what are you going to do? Blindly follow them off a cliff? No. He says, we believe in Moshe Rabbeinu only because of one reason. And that's because Hashem spoke to him on Har Sinai, and there were 6 million witnesses and many more witnesses around the world. And we saw with our own eyes. Ein Adom Eshmiya L'Riya. When somebody tells you about a religion, like the Mormons made up a religion. It says, I found a book and started talking to me, the Book of Mormon, and it was a talking bird or something, a talking lizard or whatever it was. And they told me this whole story. Oh, great, let's follow the religion. That's something you may have heard, but there's nothing to compare something you've seen with your own 2 eyes. Moshe Rabbeinu's dialogue with Hashem was viewed by witnesses. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu also gave us a mitzvah. He said, in future generations, you're going to also have Nevi'im, people who can predict the future and people who will guide you with about Hashem's will. But guess what? You think you're going to believe them because of the signs they bring? That's not why I want you to believe them. I want you to believe them because Hashem commanded me to tell you that, and you saw me speaking to Hashem and giving me the Torah. Follow me? We believe in a Navi, not because of the signs that they bring, but because Moshe said to believe them. It's a very, very big difference. It's a complete emunah in the tzaddik of Moshe Rabbeinu. And then he says, an interesting thing, he says, yeah, there is a need to bring signs. Moshe himself brought signs, right? He says, but the signs have to be things that are going to occur in the future, and that he predicts them correctly a number of times. And when that person doesn't deviate from Torah and is proven to be correct, that the word of Hashem is with him, when you're a great tzaddik, when you're a great Talmid Chacham, when you're a Gadol Dor, when you're a big Mekubal, the world is open to your mind. Your mind merges with Hashem's mind, and you just know what's going on. You know what's happening. There were people with Ruach HaKodesh. They know what's happening. Rabbi certainly was that person whose yard site was just yesterday. He knew, there's a thousand stories to back it up, but many, many great tzaddikim. They just saw from one end of the world to the other because their mind was so merged with the Kedusha of Hashem that they had Ruach HaKodesh. When you have that kind of person and it can tell you what's going on, then even if they tell you something controversial later on, like Eliyahu said, let's bring a korban on Har Carmel, which it doesn't say to do that in the Torah, you listen to them. Not because they've been confirmed by Moshe Rabbeinu, this is the Navi and this is the guy who you have to listen to. It's going to happen that there's going to be things that happen that Hashem will command the Navi to do that you may not understand. Esther's going to go be with Achashverosh. Okay? We're going to cancel Seder night because we're in trouble. There's many things that we learn from the Nevi'im that were hara'as shah, that were emergencies, just like we violate Shabbos to save a life. There are things that are overruling tendencies. Not everything. Gili raya, shvichus damim, avodah zarah, the basics. No, but under certain circumstances, other things can be permitted, and that's only because we trust the Nevi'im, because Moshe said so. That confirmed faith in a Navi. That's saying, I see the wisdom of the holy tzaddikim. I see the wisdom of the Torah teachers. This is what's at stake right now here in the land of Israel. The respect for Torah must be restored, but it must be restored in such a way that people feel accessibility and connection to Torah themselves. They must be invited into the Torah. They can't say, leave us alone and we'll do Torah and you stay over there. But there has to be something where it's restored to what it's supposed to be. That the Kohanim, those who learn Torah, are the teachers and loving teachers of all the generation. And we're not quite there yet. And there's a lot of resistance from within. Notice that Trump said, Lahavdil, that the court of Israel, the high court, is a corruption of justice. That's another miracle. That's another huge miracle. So look what's come under attack to revert these perversions of the Sheva Mitzvos. First of all, court system. How much of the Democrats perverted justice, whether it was impeachments and whether it was persecuting people through the law, whether it was this nonsense of ignoring doing justice on people like Biden and other people, protecting people, even this horrible prosecutor Kareem Khan, who was a criminal, a rapist, was allowed to pronounce indictments against the leaders of the Jewish people while he himself was a verified criminal, and eventually he was caught. And these things are coming out. The corrupt figures are unraveling. Even one of the very big people in the entertainment business, I won't mention his name, he's on trial right now for his perversions. He's on trial. And other people, Jewish and not Jewish, are on trial. And the Biden administration, it's just, everything's coming out. Everything's being brought to the surface. And there's a desire for justice and fairness. And even now here, a call in our own country, there are two major issues. One is the Supreme Court versus the Knesset, which speaks the words of the people who do want Eretz Yisrael and do want connection to Hashem and do want peaceful connections with all Jews, religious, not Jewish, and even with our Arabs that within the country, but is skewed towards a certain opinion, much like Korach was skewed towards a certain opinion. And again, the forced enrollment into the army of people who are culturally unable to live in that type of mixed environment of men and women. You want to make havdalos, you want to make things holy, you want to separate the genders, okay? You want to have bases that are the kedusha or betara, that people can learn and do Torah. I'm trying a little bit of that, but does the army really want that? Or does it want it to surrender to its current framework, which is unacceptable to any Ben Torah, obviously? And people have said, which is, I think, is the correct answer, if they'll allow the Frum community to be trained as soldiers to protect their own communities, police and paramilitary, and they would gladly take up arms outside the Batei Medrash and outside the Beit Knesset and protect their own people. And when there's terrorist attacks, defend them. You don't need soldiers for that. Soldiers can go on missions to Iran. Soldiers can defeat Gaza. We need to protect our local people. That is an immediate step that B'nai Torah would gladly take on. But do they want it? Do they want the solutions? Do we want the solutions? So everything is being very worked through. This war is another cleansing. It's another step of straightening out, the world's opinion in relationship to Hashem. The Iranians will never accept the idea that Jewish people are not only not their worst enemy, but are their best friends. But it's happened in history before. Koresh, their great figure is Koresh. He's the one that supported the building of Beis HaMikdash. The potential of that relationship is incredible. So Baruch Hashem, what I want to say is that we are in, not only do we have to be patient about political and military issues to come to the fruition, But we also have to keep an eye on a much larger process that's going on in the world. The universities have been completely embarrassed and unmasked for who they are. You can't states that are committed to philosophies that are counter to Torah mitzvos are suffering and need to be restored to order. And Baruch Hashem, even Europe came around, is coming around. They stopped off that crazy international court. There may come a day where Trump issues injunctions against the Supreme Court Justice of Israel. Mark my words, that's not out of the question. Can you imagine? And he might do that. And he'd be, in certain circumstances, probably correct to do it. Depends what is going on. Depends what their agenda is. Depends what they're trying to accomplish. And finally, if we can thank Hashem for all these slow little bits of light that are starting to open up. The ore of the generation of Mashiach is upon us. The world is being restored to a place of sanity, serenity, and peace. But we're really far along from it. And there's much work that has to happen. We can daven for it every day. But by connecting to tzaddikim like yesterday's Yortzeh, Lubavitch Rabbi, the great Torah teachers, our inspiration with Hashem, talking to Hashem, learning our text, learning from our parsha, learning from our Pnimius HaTorah, keeping our ruach happy. This is all the ore of Mashiach. The ore of Mashiach is around. We just have to open our hearts to connect with it and watch these exciting developments. And we'll have an opportunity to document things and look at a big overview of what has happened since October 7th. That's going to be a much bigger subject to tackle, but I gave you a little bit today. We're going in the right direction. Hashem should continue his blessings and victory, lat. The internal divisions within Am Yisrael must heal, and that can only be by respect for each other and for Torah. Believe it. It's the respect for Am Yisrael and also respect for Masoras Yisrael, and we can get to that place because it's within us. It's very much within us. Okay, and that means everyone. Okay, have a wonderful week. I hope to see you next time.